In the previous parts, we learned how to define a resource dictionary in the P6 database, and we defined formwork, crane, and concrete worker resources. Now, in this part, we are going to assign these resources to the related activities in the project. In P6, you can assign any resource to your activities as long as it is an active resource in the dictionary. And there is no limitation in the number of resources assigned to an activity. In order to assign resources, we are going to use Resources tab in the activity details. Here, before starting to add resources, I recommend you to arrange the columns in the Resources tab, because we don't need some of these columns, and also we need some other additional columns which are not listed here. So I will show you the most useful column setting here, and in practice I also use the same setting. Let me show you. First of all, right click here, not in this part, but you should right click in this part and select Customize Resource Columns. You see that even for a single tab, we have several data fields here. You can see some different information in these fields. And also at the right side, you can see the existing columns listed here. Now I will remove some of these items. First of all, I don't need primary resource, so I can remove it from the list. Also, I don't need original leg, actual regular units, and the roll. And I'm going to add some new items here, but before that, let me put start and finish at the bottom of the list. They can be useful after the scheduling. Now, from the general part, we can take the budgeted units information. Here we have budgeted units over time. I can take this one. Actually, during the planning stage, I mean at the beginning of the project, budgeted items and the remaining items have the same values, because as we don't have any update in the schedule, budgeted units and the remaining units will be equal. For this reason, I will also remove the remaining items. I will remove both remaining items and remaining units over time. We can have a simpler view in this way. From the general part, I will also take price over unit in order to see unit prices of the resources. Also, from the cost, I will take the budgeted cost. Here you can see the budgeted cost. And from the durations, I'm going to take the original duration in order to see the activity duration in the Resources tab. By the way, if you want, you can return to the default columns later with this option. Now I will click OK. And we are ready now, but I also need to arrange the size of these columns so that we can see them better. Okay, now I will show you how to add resources. In order to add a resource, first of all, you should select the related activity. In the exercise 8, we have the resources in the first formwork activity. So select this one, and from the Resources tab, select Add Resource. You'll see an empty list here because there's a filter. It only shows current project's resources. As we didn't assign any resource yet, we don't see anything here. Therefore, we should change the filter as all resources. Now you can see the resources that we defined before. For this activity, I need a formwork as a material resource. So select formwork, either click on assign button here or double click on the resource. You can see it here, then close the window. Now we are going to write the total amounts here. The total amount of the formwork is given as 30.43 meters square. Therefore, I'm going to write this amount to the budgeted units part. The difference between the budgeted units over time and the budgeted units is that the first one shows the daily amount and the second one shows the total amount. By default, all budgeted units over time columns take the value of 8. The duration of this activity is also 8 days. When you multiply the daily resource amount with the duration of the activity, you can find the total resource amount as 64 in the budgeted units column. But in the exercise, the total amount was 30.43 meters square. So I write this number to the budgeted units column. P6 shows you the rounded numbers, but actually it uses the 2 decimal numbers that I wrote here. If you want to see that numbers, then you should change the options. Let me show you how to do this. Select Edit and User Preferences. Here in the units format, you can see the units format here. Select the decimals as 2. Now you see that it is 30.43. If you also want to see meter square here, because the total amount is given in terms of the meter square, return to User Preferences, and this time select Show Unit Label. And close this one. Now you can also see the meter square here. And as you can see, P6 also calculates the daily resource amount automatically by dividing budgeted units to the total duration of the activity, which is 8. So our daily formwork production here is 3.80 meters square. You may also want to see a duration label here. For this purpose, again, use the user preferences. And now, in durations format, select Show Duration Label and close this one. Now it is written as 8D. D stands for the day, and it can be also seen in the duration column of the activity window. So this is the way to assign material resources. It means that we should use the budgeted units column. In practice, we usually have such kind of data for the material resources because in quantity takeoff, we calculate the total material amount for each activity. We usually don't deal with the daily amounts. For this reason, we just entered the total amount to this column and the daily amount is calculated by P6. But for the labor and non-labor resources, we have a different approach because for these resources, we have the data given in terms of the numbers. For example, for this activity, the amount of crane is given as 2 in the exercise. Now I will assign the crane resources here. Select add resource and select crane and close the window. Now you can see the crane here. Uh, Remember that P6 measures the amount of labor and non-labor resources in terms of hours. So by default, we have 8 here in budgeted units over time column. Here, 8 hours per day means that we have one crane working 8 hours per day, because we know that in our calendar, one day equals to 8 hours. For this reason, we understand that there's a one crane here. But in the exercise, it is given as 2 cranes. It means that I need 2 cranes for each day. For this reason, I should write here 16 as a daily amount. 16 hours per day indicates that there are 2 cranes working in this activity. And you see that this time P6 multiply the daily amount with the total duration and find the total amount of working time for these cranes as 128 hours for 8 days. So as a general summary, for labor and non-labor resources, um, the type of data we have in construction works is more suitable to be written in terms of daily amounts because we know the number of resources. But for material resources, the type of data is more suitable to be written in terms of total amounts because we know the total amount given by the quantity takeoff. So you should use this logic while assigning your resources to the activities. And P6 also calculates the cost of the resources over the unit prices if you don't change the default options. Here you can see the unit prices, but you cannot change it here because we defined the unit prices when we create our resources. Let me remind you from enterprise and resources. For example, we have crane here and the unit price of the crane was defined as $100 per hour. So you can change the unit price here, but you cannot change the unit price in the activities window. You can only see it. So P6 multiplies unit price with the budgeted units and finds the budgeted cost for each resource. For example, our cranes are working 128 hours in this activity and the unit price is $100. When we multiply these two numbers, we can find the budgeted cost as $12,800. But it is possible to change the total cost manually. And same calculation is made for the formwork. And the total cost for this activity will be the summation of these two numbers. And the total cost of the project will be the summation of the activities. As you see, total project cost is calculated from the unit prices of the resources. So let's continue with the second activity. According to our exercise, we have 2 cranes here. So I'm going to add resource here and I will select crane and write 16 to budgeted units over time. That's it. Now we also defined the total amount of cranes for this activity. For concrete, we have 3 concrete workers. Select add resource and select concrete worker. Close the window. We have the same logic here with the crane because labor resources are also measured with hours. If we have 3 concrete workers, it means that we need 24 hours per day as the total daily working time of these 3 concrete workers. This time, budgeted units over time and budgeted units have the same number because the activity duration is 1 day. So daily amount equals to the total amount, of course. And the total cost is calculated by multiplying 24 hours with the $8 per hour. And as a result, the budgeted cost is calculated as $192. So we completed the resources in the first floor. For the second floor, we have the same resources, but the amounts are different. Now we will assign them. Sometimes you may want to assign a resource to more than one activity at the same time. For example, we have the crane both for the formwork and the reinforcement activities. When you select these 2 activities together, you see that you cannot choose the add resource option. But let me show you another trick in P6. You can use the command bar. Here we have a resources icon, and here you can select the crane and you can close this window. Now, as you can see in formwork and reinforcement, I have the crane resource. So when you select more than one activity, you cannot use this part, but you can use the command bar. Okay. Now we are going to assign the total amounts of these items. For the crane, you should write 16 to budgeted units over time. And in the reinforcement, we have the same amount because for both of these activities, we have 2 cranes. And in the formwork, I also have a formwork resource. Let's use this resources tab in the command bar again. By the way, if you see a mouse icon here, it means that this resource is assigned to your project. Also, you can use the search window here. For example, I can write here formwork. If you have a too long list, this search window is a useful option. You can easily find your resource. Now, I will select this formwork resource. This time, the budgeted unit for the formwork is given as 29.56 meters square. And for reinforcement, we have already assigned the crane and changed the amount. And for the concrete, select add resource and find concrete worker here. This time in the exercise, we have 2 workers. It means that I'm going to write here 16. And now we assigned all resources to our activities. And it is the end of this part. Thank you for your attention. In the next part, we will continue with assigning the relationships between the activities.